All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you just a couple more techniques for when you really want to splurge, I guess you could say, or you really just want to lean into a distorted rock vocal sound. So in the indie rock vocal mix portion of module 5 here, I walked you through Easy Day's song You and I. And basically what we're going to do now is simply extend this vocal mix and lean into more distortion and the really heavier rock sound. But that's not all. I am going to also show you some extra tips when it comes to using slap delay for your rock vocal mixes, because slap delay is probably the most important effect to get good at when it comes to reverbs or delays for a rock vocal. Okay, so we want to make sure that we lean in and that we are very skilled in our ability to add distortion and saturation to these types of vocals, as well as slapback delays. Okay, so let's start with distortion. So we're going to come back to this song, You and I by Easy Day, that we just worked on. And now let's start throwing some distortion at it. So here's what it sounds like right now.
Started up on a hill, the story that will unfold and we chill.
Okay, so I'm going to leave, for now, I'm going to leave all the other effects the way that they are. And let's just experiment with some different distortion plugins. So I'm going to come in here to the lead vocals bus. Now we already have a bit of saturation and distortion, and I walked you through this in the indie rock vocal mix, where we have the red light distortion. We also have Ozone 9 turned on for certain parts of this vocal, which adds some extra saturation. But overall, relatively speaking, it is still a fairly subtle effect. And so now let's just pretend that we want to completely shred this lead vocal. What we're trying to kind of do is create the effect of running your vocal through an overdriven guitar amp. That is the effect that we often want to hear when we are going for that distorted, grittier rock vocal sound. So let's start with a free plugin. Let's just see what a plugin like, say, Saturation Knob might do on a vocal like this.
Every night was the same, you and I remember when you fell, I crouched down to.
Now, as you can hear, there's a pretty clear problem here, and that is this saturation plugin does not have an output volume, which means we can't turn down the overall sound. So what we need to do is, I'm just going to add a gain plugin, in this case just Mixtool in Studio One, to compensate for the added volume. Because just with the way that our ears work, we generally perceive louder as being better. And so we don't want to fool our ears here, but let's see if this is close to where it was. Okay, it still needs to be a good, maybe even 10 dB of a volume cut there. So let's see what this is. And then with this particular plugin, we have the option of focusing the saturation towards more of the high frequencies as well as the low, and then the default is the neutral. So let's see what it sounds like if we go to keep high here on the saturation type. See, when I go to keep low, it's too beefy. That is what I tend to use perhaps on a bass guitar or a kick drum. Something like that might sound good, but I don't think in this case. Let's see if we want the neutral or the keep high. Yeah, I think for a vocal, the keep high preset is a good setting here under the saturation type. And then I'll just scale this back a little bit. Let's see what it's like without the saturation. So much cleaner, right? But then we add the saturation. So there is a great example of the power of just throwing a saturation or distortion plugin on a vocal to just make it sound grittier and rockier. And the beautiful thing, this is a free plugin by Softube. So if you don't have this plugin, be sure to go grab it. It's an incredible plugin, especially considering that it's free. Okay, so Now I'm going to turn those off and let's just explore another type of saturation or distortion. Maybe go for, I have a Neve preamp that we could try, and let's see how this works, or let's see how this sounds.
I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help. You were fine. Just to let the
Okay, so we probably want the mic mode since in this video I'm showing you the really grittier stuff, right?
my surprise.
That is so loud though. Here, let's bring this back.
That was the first time I held your
Notice how the output at -24, so I'm cutting the volume as much as possible and it's still kind of shredding it.
small hand us back to high.
Or not, I don't know why I said shredding it. It's more just, it's really cranking the volume here. I guess shredding it would be a fair. Why am I second guessing myself? Come on, Marcus.
Felt the vibe.
Maybe I do want the line setting.
Go inside.
Yeah.
Went inside each other's minds, pulling out emotions, and you and I.
So again, what we can do is I like that sound, and then we would just need to use another plugin like Mix Tool again, put it after, and just drop the volume down.
The story that would unfold and we'd chill. Every night was the same, you and I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help. You were fine.
This is a really, really good plugin. This came with my UAD Apollo Twin interface that I bought a few years ago. And I've just more recently reactivated my UAD plugins. For whatever reason, I hadn't really been using them much for the past couple years. And so just recently I've resurfaced them, and this is just a fantastic sounding distortion, as you can hear. And so that would be another example of a plugin that I could use if I really wanted to make this vocal sound rockier. Okay, so let's come over here to the chorus sections where it gets a bit louder to see how this sounds. Here, I just turned that off. Let me turn that back on. The Neve preamp and the mix tool.
Not the same, I'll take the blame one more time. Please don't hide. You and I. Not the same, I'll take the blame one more time. Please don't hide. You and I.
Now, an important point I will make here that I just thought of is when you are adding distortion or saturation, often it's a good idea to keep the EQ in mind and make sure that you're paying attention to what you're listening to, because distortion and saturation plugins, especially when you use them in excess and you really push the pedal, so to speak, on those effects, you may need to then add an EQ plugin after the distortion. So we might, in this case, we might need to do something like this.
Not the same, let's give it a try for a while.
See, distortions and saturations, they often tend to add a bit of boxiness, which can be a cool effect, but sometimes in the low mid-range or in the lows, or even in the highs as well, it just sometimes builds up too much, so you may need to come in and do some EQ work.
Turn back time. You and I. You and I. Not the same, I'll take the blame.
Right, you might need to do something like that, because if I turn this off,
One more time, please don't hide. You and I. And I. Not the same, I'll take the blame. One more time, please don't hide. You and
I would say the first place to generally go look, or that I tend to go look in, is this low mid-range here. If in this specific type of case where I add a whole bunch of distortion or saturation, that is more often than not where it tends to build up a bit too much. So there you go. Those are two examples using either the saturation knob is what we started with, or the Neve preamp. Of course, no matter the plugin, every plugin has a slightly different sound. So this is where you just experiment. You use what you have. Your DAW probably has a couple distortion plugins that come stock that actually sound pretty good. So make sure that you become very familiar with your DAW and the plugins that are there, and then go get a saturation knob plugin. It's completely free, so there's just no excuses. You can get really, really good sounding distortion and saturation effects on your vocal without spending a bunch of money. Okay? So that is a little crash course on distortion and saturation if you want to really crank it up for a heavy rock vocal. And then one more quick thing I want to mention here is let's focus in on the slapback delay. And I'm just going to show you a couple quick tips when it comes to maximizing it. So that way we can really isolate the slapback delay. I'm going to turn off the reverbs and the other delays that we used so we can really just hear the slapback delay. So this is the slapback that we used when we did the indie rock vocal mix series.
When you fell, I crouched down to give you help you will find. Just a rock to cut you by surprise.
So that's the basic effect. It is a slapback delay. You can mess around with the delay time.
That was the first time I held your small hand was back to help you and I.
So there it's super tight.
Felt the vibe, it was time to go inside. Went inside.
And then a key parameter to pay attention to is the feedback. So the default, I would say by definition, a slapback delay usually will start with the feedback at 0 because then it's just one slapback. But you can get a cool springing effect if you raise this. So listen to the effect this has.
Each other's minds, pulling our emotions out.
Right, it's the springing effect where you go, you know.
You and I.
So with certain songs, that is just a beautiful effect. In this case, I just ended up with the feedback at 0, and that sounded good to me. So generally speaking, for the slapback delay, I like to keep this between like 50 and 200. Most of the time, it'll be between 50 and 150 milliseconds for the delay time. And in this case, it was around 120, 125. So what you're hearing here
We're talking the secret during the night.
is a pretty mono effect at this point, and that sounds good to me. We could, although, make it even more mono if we came into this return track here and clicked on this to make the entire return track channel mono. So there's even more mono.
You and I. Not the same, let's give it a try for a while. Turn back time.
Right? So this is where you just want to experiment. Sometimes, depending on your mix, depending on the song, just trust your ears, guys. Sometimes mono sounds better, sometimes stereo sounds better. Okay, so let me give you an example of what it could sound like if we make this sound a bit more stereo. So for this plugin, we do have the stereo spread option here. So let's see what happens if we just crank this.
You and I. You and I. Not the same, let's give it a try for a while. Please don't hide. You and I.
So yeah, that is stereo, and then we have, again, mono.
You and I. Not the same, let's give it a try for a while. Turn back time.
And then that's kind of in between, right? That's where there's no spread turned on here in Valhalla Delay, but it is by default. It's not exactly mono completely, but then when we do turn the mono button here, it goes completely mono, and then you can mess with the stereo spread of it. If your delay plugin that you're using doesn't have the spread option, or if you just want to go about it in a more organic way, then you can, most delays have the ability to go delay left and right, so you can offset them. So you could have 126 on the left and then maybe 90 on the right. And that creates a stereo effect as well. And I would say that sounds better, actually. So I would recommend that probably over the stereoizing effect that these types of plugins can add. I think it's usually better to just get the effect naturally by making the left and the right delay offset. That way, by nature, it creates a nice stereo width effect to it.
You and I.
That's such a cool sound, right?
Let's give it a try for a while. Please don't hide. You and I.
And And then last but not least, another thing that is very important in most songs to pay attention to, and this applies to any delays and reverbs in your mix, is you want to make sure that number one, there isn't too much low end buildup in that effect, and number two, that there isn't too much high end buildup in that effect. I don't know if you noticed, but this slap delay is super warm, right? It's almost like somebody put a blanket over this effect. Listen to how warm and filtered out it sounds.
Tonight, you and I, not the same, let's give it
Here, let's come back to the single style.
a try for a while, turn back time.
I just think that sounds better.
You and I.
But it's a very warm sound, right? And that is because of the EQ settings over here. Now, it is partially because of the lo-fi mode. So Valhalla Delay, I'm just maximizing and experimenting with the plugin. If I used a different delay plugin, I would maximize it in a different way. But you have, tape, something like this.
Not the same, let's give it a try for a while, please don't hide. You and I.
So even just being in lo-fi mode, the delay itself has a warmer tone to it, not quite as many high frequencies. But more than that, the majority of that warmth is coming from this EQ on the high cut especially. So if I take this up like this, there it's all the brightness comes through.
I remember when you fell, I crashed down to give you help, you were fine. Just a rock that caught you by surprise. That was the first time I held your small hand was back to.
Do you notice how the high frequencies don't really seem to add anything valuable to it? It's just almost empty frequencies that don't actually make the vocal mix sound better. And in fact, I'd argue it makes the mix sound worse. So make sure that you are using the high cuts and the low cuts inside of your delays and reverbs. Mess around with it until you find a good pocket for it. Now, if your delay plugin doesn't have this type of low and high cut, as is here in Valhalla Delay, you can, since I'm going to assume that you are setting this up on a return track like I always teach you to do. Since this slap delay is on a return track, I can just add a normal EQ after this delay, and that will then have the exact same type of effect. Plus, actually, we have even more control. Right there, it's extremely underwater. Now, what I meant by doing it this way gives you even more control is if you want to. If you wanted to, for whatever reason, give a more telephonic sound, you could boost it up in this range, right? If we felt like that tickled our fancy on a particular day, then we could of course do that. So even I will sometimes do both. Sometimes I will have the high cut and the low cut active to give me a starting point, but then I will go even more customized with another EQ added onto the slapback delay chain on this return track. Okay. And also don't forget about the low end. Just by default, I will almost always roll off the low end on a delay or a reverb starting at around 300 Hertz. And then I'll even sometimes take it higher than that, just depending on what I'm feeling and what my ears are hearing. So there you go. Those are some tips for slapback delay. Now to finish this up, let's see what this sounds like if we turn the distortion back on, maybe use that Neve preamp distortion, the EQ, the mix tool, and this UAD Neve preamp, as well as the slap delay. And let's see what we got. See how it sounds over here.
Why is it going away? Who made it this way? The travel.
I hope you are experiencing and feeling the beauty of these two core effects when it comes to an aggressive rock vocal sound. If you can master the skills of using distortion and saturation, and you can master the skill of using slapback delay, you are well on your way, so long as the vocal take is good, so long as you have also built up your skills of EQ, compression, and saturation, as I teach you in Module 4 and then in Module 5 here as well. As long as you have all of those steps down, then once you get to really exaggerating a particular effect like distortion and or slap delay, you have the power to create really powerful effects and vocal mixes, and then mixes at large with all the other instrumentation and everything else as well. Okay, so that is where we will wrap up this video. Those were just a couple mix tricks and tips for when you want to really push the pedal and get an aggressive rock vocal. All right, I'll see you in the next video.